Can borrow examples from across the globe, actually. Aid industry thrives in corrupt systems. Aid industry has been here with us for decades. How do you justify the refinancing of interventions that clearly you can see they're not strengthening the local systems and the impact to the people, to the populace, because there has to be accountability, there has to be sustainability, is not at par? How do you justify the continuous thriving of the aid industry, especially now in countries where these systems are weak and corrupt?
Another excellent question. I think there's a few dynamics going on from this point Timothy was making, which is really excellent. Like a lot of countries I've worked in, you go to different communities and you ask, okay, if you had a problem or if you ran out of money or food, who would you go to? And often the answer is, this NGO or this UN agency. And that is kind of reflective of a lot of the dynamics we are talking about. But in terms of the corruption, I think there's really this nuance, which is kind of a difficult balance to kind of go along. That, okay, yes, corruption and illicit financial flows are a big issue in many countries. But the idea of just suddenly cutting off aid and doing essentially shock therapy is extremely dangerous, because you have this whole system that just collapses, as we saw to some degree last year, and may actually escalate even further this year in Kenya, Somalia, across the world. And that means a lot of people dying and potential famine in many locations. So this sudden shock therapy is not the way to do it. It's how do you go through a staged process of handing over, and also looking towards those long-term solutions, but also focusing on aspects like civic space, civil society activity to hold authorities accountable, rather than just going, okay, we're going to cut off aid that can be extremely disruptive. So some of our research also looks at, in parallel to the aid system, you actually have illicit financial flows in Kenya that are about 1.5 billion annually, and this is reported by multiple different sources. And so if you start to tackle that, the aid money becomes less relevant. But if you don't tackle the illicit financial flows first, cutting off aid is deeply irresponsible. And there's also this one element as well of a lot of aid props up negative things, but then there are aspects, there is a lot of accountability systems within a lot of aid, so a lot of donors impose very strict conditionalities, and so not the entire system is corrupt per se, but it kind of feeds into a lot of problematic governance dynamics in many countries.
And you see those governance dynamics somehow, they allow or create room for infiltration now of culture, because there's also the social impact, the social aspect of it. When parallel programs are being run by the government and the aid community, we've seen cases in various countries whereby there's a bit of a clash between culture, because this will come with an organized agenda. This is what they are offering as aid, as an intervention. However, they would want this community to respond in this particular manner. So how do we find the safety nets, or the safeguards for the communities that are vulnerable at the time? Because everybody who is seeking aid at the time, they are vulnerable, be they an individual, a community, or a government. How do we say? Do we have safeguards from exploitation? Is there a monitoring scheme where you'd be able to say, okay, this aid comes in this form and manner, this is the expected impact, however, we need to be cautious of these ramifications? What are the safeguards we have, and how is that looking like from the report? What points of exploitation did you discover from the aid community that now the local administration needs to be very, on the outlook?
I can list off some very bad examples. Previously working in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, at the Rohingya genocide. And I arrived, went round, and there were accountability boxes where people could put in a note saying, they have an issue or concern about something. This is for a population that basically was not particularly literate. All the signs were in a language they didn't understand. And unsurprisingly, all the boxes were empty. So it was there was an accountability system in theory, but not actually used. Then you have other dynamics, like going back to, I was in Kenya in 2012, up in Kakuma and Turkana, and you had excellent, Canary, the Kakuma News Reflector, a locally led, refugee-run outlet for holding the aid system to account. And then it reported on different issues, but it really faced so much pressure from UN agencies and from others to not report on aid problems, aid misuse. And so you have these kind of excellent, very effective like refugee-run systems such as Canary, but then they face these immense pressures because there is a lot of pushback from different aid actors to avoid accountability. But at the same time, there are more boring processes such as procurement of getting, various quotes and other aspects that there is degrees of accountability, and it's certainly improved. I think there's been some innovations in certain countries around using mobile phone-based or text messages to improve accountability. So it does exist. It has improved in many ways, but the other examples in Bangladesh and Kakuma and Drakana are examples of like things that still have a long way to go.